It's very easy to avoid the hardcore sins. And it's very hard to hold back from the easier, subtler expressions of sinfulness in any tradition. Another way of saying it is that 90% of us and the people we know have no problem observing 90% of at least the ethical and moral obligations that are expressed in the Torah. The ritual ones are different. You have to have a certain amount of specific intent to do them. But when you look at the Ten Commandments, most of us don't need the Ten Commandments to know not to murder. Maybe society learned not to murder as a result of that list, but we don't need that particular set of verses from the book of Exodus and Dvarim to stay away from that. The subtler expressions of killing in our tradition extended public embarrassment all the way to being close to taking a life. Those are harder. Most of us are not tempted to bow down to an idol, to actually prostrate ourselves in the presence of a foreign god. It's a lot harder to be honest about what in the modern world can be very close to idolatry and to keep ourselves from that temptation. I share that because I want to trace with you a beautiful, both expansion and narrowing at the same time, of a law that comes up at the end of Parshat Maseh. We're going to go from verse to the Sifrei, Midrash the verse, to Nachmanides the Ramban, to the Chafetz Chaim, who was both a halachist and exceedingly committed to the concept of using our words carefully. An enormous amount of material that he produced in the Jewish world has to do with keeping ourselves free from Lashon Hara, from evil speech. The context is a repeat of the laws about what happens when one is both an intentional and involuntary taking of a life. One of them requires taking of the life of the murderer, and the other one requires fleeing to the Ir Miklat, to the city of refuge, right? In biblical law, if you took a life, but it was not intentional under certain circumstances, the avengers had no right to take yours and the court wouldn't, and both to spare you from their vengeance and also to recognize the fact that even if you take a life by accident, you've still taken a life, you go to an Ir Miklat, a city of refuge where you're protected from their ire and you're removed from society for a little bit as a punishment. And the Torah says that you can imagine that someone would plead both for their life and their freedom. They would plead for their life if they were guilty of capital offense and they would be having their life taken, and they'd plead for their freedom if they were being banished to the Ir Miklat. And the Torah says, Lo tikchu kofer. Don't take any ransom, no matter how much someone is willing to pay you to spare them the capital punishment, don't accept it. And nor can you accept a kofer, a ransom, if they're pleading with you to not be sent to the Ir Miklat, even though they might actually be safer there because they're protected from the vengeance of the family of the one they killed. This is all in chapter 35 of the book of Bamidbar. And then in verse 33, after it mentions don't take a ransom in either of the situations, the Torah says, Lo tachnifu et haaretz. Don't machnif, I'm going to untranslate it so far, the land. Asher atem ba, that you're going to go into. Ki hadam hu yachnif haaretz. The blood will machnif the land. What does machnif mean? It's often translated here as to pollute or to profane. Don't engage in a lightening of the sentence and in that way profane the sanctity of the land that I'm giving to you, or pollute it. The idea being that justice could sometimes be severe. Even if when it's fair, it could be severe. And if you're too easy on someone in either situation, the land is going to be a land that is going to lack the sanctity that I, God, want for it. But because it's an interesting word, lachnif, hard to translate either in modern English or even in a biblical idiom. And because the Torah had already made very specific rules about what what's required, and that is to not accept a ransom, the Midrash says this is an azhara, a warning to the chanafim. The root chanaf can also mean to flatter, to say nice words that you don't really mean to make someone feel a little bit better about themselves. And flattery, in this case, is not a positive concept. It's fawning. It's faux. It is creating a fake intimacy between you and someone, and it might not be earned praise. And since the roots are the same, the Midrash says, in addition to this being specific laws regarding the situation of the murderer and the manslayer, it's also a warning that you should not allow flattery to enter into society in ancient Israel. The Ramban expands that and tries to make a connection between flattery and the situation at hand. And he says that on some level, by accepting the bribe, the ransom of the person who's trying to get out of a worse punishment, you're essentially flattering them. You're essentially saying, you're not as bad as everyone thinks you are. What you did was not as awful as what everyone thinks. It is a common human instinct to, when you're in someone's presence, even if they are an evildoer, to make them feel a little bit better about their situation. I've done that many times. In fact, I think sometimes it's my rabbinic obligation when there's someone who has committed a certain transgression or sometimes even a crime, and their community and their society is flogging them for it, sometimes publicly. Sometimes I feel it's my rabbinic obligation to let them know that I see their human dignity, they're worth something, and they're not the dirtiest of the dirt that some people are making out them to be. But the Ramban says that, taken to an extreme, can itself be sinful and it can pollute the land. And the Chafetz Chaim comments on the Ramban and says the following thing, and he moves it from actual spilling of blood to the subtle but dangerous ways we use our interactions with other people to lessen the sanctity of the human condition. And he gives a situation, he's writing late 19th century, early 20th century, which is so contemporary. He says, imagine you're next to somebody who starts speaking poorly of someone else, saying Lashon Hara, bringing them down. What do? It's very hard to stop them. It's very hard to hold yourself back from that which you think might be holier than thou and say, is this really the language that you want to use? What you might do is you nod your head. He says, Mina'anei rosho, you kind of quietly acquiesce. And then he says, you might use words that machlik et hadavar, soften the matter, make it a little more slippery, make it not as harsh as what the person has said, but you don't chastise them. And you might even add your own words to let that person know that you're not against them. Why are you doing it? Because you want that person to like you. You want that person to think highly of you. And even though they're involved in an actual transgression of Lashon Hara, to not have the fortitude to stop it, to be subtly acquiescing and adding to it, even if you're lessening the intensity of what he says, that's chanafa. That's flattery. And that is the type of flattery that the Torah is prohibiting in this verse. Torah here is not just prohibiting the ransom, because otherwise it wouldn't have had to repeat itself. The Torah is prohibiting that sort of easy, subtle expansion of no good because you didn't have the institutional fortitude to stand up. I've done it many times, and I never feel good about it afterwards. There are people in our community who either use words or speak about certain people and certain types of people that I find to be distasteful, either because they're bordering on misogynistic, or they're bordering on racist, or they're bordering on something that I can't countenance. Boy, is it hard in the moment to wag the finger. Boy, is it hard to threaten my relationship with that person, to be overly judgmental. And I know there have been moments where I have either given a sardonic sigh, or maybe raised an eyebrow, or subtly tried to soften what they said. And the Chafetz Chaim is calling me out for sinful behavior, for chanafa, for yielding to flattery, when what holy, speech and holy behavior is asking for something much higher and much harder than this. It's easy to get 90% of the way to the observance of the mitzvot. The last 10% is the reason why we study and pray and learn and stretch and recognize where we fail and commit again to try to succeed. Every failure should not make us flagellate ourselves to think that we're no good, but rather a reminder of how much work we have to do to get to a place where all of our speech and all of our behavior will make this land and any land that we find ourselves in to be truly Admat Kodesh, a land of holiness. That's our challenge on Shabbat. That's our challenge every day. Watch what you say. Watch how you listen to what others say. Avoid the flattery that pollutes society, and try to build holiness all around you.